He didn't run. He didn't hide. When 30 armed officers surrounded his penthouse at 4 a.m., he was already dressed. Suit pressed, coffee hot, hands visible on the table. Like he knew. Like he'd been waiting. And that should have been the first warning.
Detective Frank Henderson had waited 11 years for this moment. 11 years of dead witnesses, burned evidence, colleagues transferred, demoted, or worse, quietly reassigned to desk jobs after getting too close. But tonight was different. Tonight they had everything. Wiretaps, financial records, a witness in protective custody 3 states away. Testimony from a former lieutenant who'd flipped 18 months ago after his brother ended up in a hospital with no explanation. The case was airtight. Henderson stood in the elevator of the Meridian Tower, 42 floors up, heart steady. He'd rehearsed this moment in his bathroom mirror more times than he'd admit. He'd planned what he would say, how he'd hold the cuffs, the exact words. The doors opened. The penthouse hallway was silent. 2 officers swept left, 2 swept right. Henderson moved straight ahead toward the double doors at the end of the corridor. They were already open. He stepped inside, and there he was. Tony Reeves. 53 years old, silver hair swept back, dark blue suit. Not pajamas, not a robe, a suit, like he had a board meeting in 20 minutes. He was seated at the head of a long dining table, both hands resting flat on the surface, a half-finished espresso to his right. He looked up when Henderson entered, and he smiled. Henderson held up the badge out of habit. Tony Reeves, you're under arrest for racketeering, conspiracy to commit murder, money laundering, and I know why you're here, detective. His voice was low, unhurried, like a man reading a bedtime story to a child. I've been expecting you. Henderson cuffed him. Reeves didn't flinch, didn't tense. His wrists moved forward cooperatively, almost gracefully, like this was a handshake and not an arrest. The cuffs clicked. And in that moment, just for a second, Henderson felt something crawl up the back of his neck. He couldn't name it. He pushed it down. We got him. The drive to the precinct was quiet. Reeves sat in the back of the vehicle, hands cuffed in his lap, looking out the window at the city, like a tourist taking in the skyline. Not once did he look at Henderson. Not once did he ask for a lawyer. He just watched the city. Officer Precious Acoffer was riding shotgun. She'd been on the task force for 3 years, and she'd seen plenty of dangerous men brought in. Usually they performed threats, silence, rage, tears, something. Reeves gave her nothing. At one point, she glanced in the rearview mirror. He was already looking at her. She turned back to the road, said nothing. When they arrived at the precinct, the press was already outside. Someone had leaked the arrest, probably someone on their own side, Henderson thought bitterly. 6 news vans, cameras flashing, reporters shouting questions into the dark. Reeves walked through the crowd like he was arriving at a film premiere, upright, composed, almost dignified. One reporter got close enough to shout, "Mr. Reeves, do you have anything to say?" He paused, just for a moment. He turned to the camera and very quietly said, "The city is in good hands." Then he walked inside. The reporters looked at each other. Nobody laughed. Nobody knew what to make of it. Henderson caught it on his way past. The city is in good hands. He told himself it was a deflection, the ramblings of a man trying to look calm for the cameras. He told himself that. Inside, the precinct buzzed with the energy of a major operation coming together. 12 detectives, 3 prosecutors on standby, the captain, a broad-shouldered man named Elliot Graves, pacing his office with the satisfied tension of someone who'd been building to this for a long time. Reeves was booked, photographed, fingerprinted. He complied with everything. No resistance, no delay, no cold stare or power play, just quiet cooperation. The booking officer, a young cop named Diego Marsh, had been warned that Reeves was dangerous. He'd read the file. He'd seen the photographs, the aftermath of what happened to people who crossed the Reeves organization. He'd prepared himself mentally for something intense. Instead, he got a man who said thank you when handed a cup of water, who asked politely if the holding room had a chair with good back support because of an old injury, who sat down, folded his hands, and waited. Diego stood outside the holding room afterward and stared at the door for a moment longer than necessary. He couldn't figure out why his hands were trembling. Henderson entered the interrogation room at 6:14 a.m. Reeves was seated, calm, the untouched cup of water still in front of him. He hadn't asked for his lawyer yet. That alone was unusual enough that Henderson had flagged it. Criminals either demanded their lawyer immediately or tried to talk their way out. Reeves was doing neither. Henderson sat down across from him, set a thick folder on the table, didn't open it. "You know what's in here?" Henderson asked. Reeves glanced at the folder, then back at Henderson. 11 years of your life, he said simply. Henderson's jaw tightened. That's one way to look at it. It's the accurate way. Reeves tilted his head slightly. You've sacrificed a great deal to be sitting in that chair, detective. I want you to know I respect that. I'm not here for your respect. I know. You're here for your conviction. A pause. You should call your daughter. Henderson went still. Excuse me? She called you twice this week. You haven't called back. Reeves' expression didn't change. It's a small thing, but small things compound. Silence sat heavy in the room. Henderson leaned forward. Is that a threat? Reeves looked almost sad. No, detective. It's advice. Henderson stood up. The air in the room had shifted in a way he couldn't quantify. He felt like he'd walked into a conversation that had already been happening without him, like he was 5 pages behind in a book Reeves had already finished. He picked up the folder. Your lawyer will be here in an hour. Don't say anything else until then. Reeves nodded politely. Of course. Henderson walked out of the room. In the hallway, he stopped, put his back against the wall, breathed. How did he know about my daughter? By 8 a.m., it felt like a triumph. Captain Graves held a quiet briefing in the conference room. The task force was assembled, tired, coffee-fueled, but electric with the relief of something long-awaited finally arriving. Reeves is in holding. The DA's office is filing charges this morning. Our witness in protective custody is confirmed and ready. This is it, people. Graves looked around the room. 11 years. We did it. Applause. Real, genuine applause. Henderson clapped along with the rest of them. But his eyes were on the floor. Something was sitting in the back of his mind like a splinter, invisible, irritating. He couldn't get to it. Precious caught him in the hallway afterward. You good? Fine. You don't look fine. I'm fine, Precious. She studied him for a moment. Then, did anything happen in the interrogation room? Henderson paused. He knew about my daughter, that I hadn't called her back. Precious frowned. That's surveillance? They had eyes on you? Maybe, or he was guessing, or someone talked. Henderson shook his head. It doesn't matter. He's locked up. The case is solid. Precious nodded slowly. Yeah, but she didn't walk away. He asked me something too, she said quietly, when I was processing him. He asked how my mother was doing, by name. She let that sit for a second. My mother lives in another country, Frank. Her name is not in any file connected to me. The hallway felt colder than it had a moment ago. 9:17 a.m. The first call came in to Captain Graves's office. A deputy commissioner, just checking in, routine, complimenting the team on the arrest. Graves thanked him, hung up, thought nothing of it. 9:44 a.m. A second call this time from an attorney Henderson had never heard of, a firm out of Washington, already filing a motion. Not Reeves' personal lawyer, a separate firm entirely, high profile, the kind of firm that handled foreign dignitaries and heads of state. Henderson stared at the motion papers when they arrived by fax. Why does Tony Reeves have access to that firm?
10:02 a.m. Graves was called into a private meeting with two men in suits who arrived without badges, without identification, and were escorted to his office by the precinct commander himself, a man who had never, in Henderson's memory, personally escorted anyone anywhere. The door closed. The meeting lasted 22 minutes. When Graves came out, something about his face had changed. He wasn't pale exactly, but he was quiet in a way he hadn't been before. Henderson approached him immediately. "Captain, what was that?" Graves looked at him, then looked past him, like he was calculating something. "Nothing. Federal interest in the case. Standard procedure." "That didn't look standard." "Drop it, Frank." He walked away. Henderson stood in the middle of the bullpen and felt the room, the same room that had been buzzing with victory 2 hours ago, begin to hum with a different kind of energy. Uncertainty. 10:45 a.m. Henderson's phone rang. Unknown number. He answered. A voice, clipped, professional, careful. "Detective Henderson, I'm calling on behalf of Reeves' legal team. We need to discuss the terms of your star witnesses cooperation agreement." Henderson gripped the phone. "You don't have access to information about our witness?" "Detective." A pause, long enough to be deliberate. "Your witness checked out of protective custody this morning at 6 a.m. of his own volition. He's no longer cooperating." The line went dead. Henderson stared at the phone. Then he was moving down the hall into the operations room, pulling up the secure communication channel to the U.S. Marshals handling the witness. He typed in his access code. A red banner appeared on the screen. "Access suspended. Contact Federal Liaison." He tried again. Same result. He picked up the phone, called the direct line for the Marshal station. It rang, and rang, and rang. Nobody answered. Something changed in the precinct around noon. It was subtle, impossible to point to, but Henderson felt it. A senior detective named Rebecca Vane, who had been on the task force since the beginning and had more invested in this case than almost anyone, was called out of the building at 11 a.m. for what her sergeant described as a personal matter. She hadn't come back. 3 junior officers who'd been assigned to evidence documentation that morning were quietly reassigned to street patrol. The evidence room, Henderson noticed, had 2 new officers on it he'd never seen before. When he asked the desk sergeant who authorized the reassignment, the sergeant checked his screen, frowned, and said, "It came from upstairs." "Which part of upstairs?" Another frown. "I'm not sure, detective. I assumed you knew." Henderson walked back to his desk and sat very still for a long moment. He thought about something Reeves had said in the interrogation room. 11 years of your life. Not the investigation, not the case. Your life. Like he'd been watching the whole time. 12:30 p.m. Henderson went back to the holding area. He stood outside the reinforced window and looked in at Reeves, who was seated exactly as he'd left him hours ago. Same posture, same stillness. The water cup had been refilled at some point. Reeves looked up, saw him through the glass. He didn't wave, didn't smile this time. He just looked. Henderson pressed the intercom. "Your witness is gone." Reeves said nothing. "Your motion from that Washington firm, it won't hold. The evidence stands regardless of witness testimony." Still nothing. "You hear me? It doesn't matter what you've done out there. You are in here." Reeves slowly stood from his chair, walked to the glass, stopped 2 feet from it. He looked at Henderson with something close to sympathy. And then, barely above a whisper, quiet enough that Henderson had to lean toward the intercom to hear it. "Detective, who do you think built this room?" Henderson stepped back. Not physically. He didn't move his feet. But something inside him stepped back. Reeves turned away from the glass and walked back to his chair, sat down, folded his hands, and waited. 1 p.m. Captain Graves called Henderson into his office and closed the door. He didn't sit down. That told Henderson everything. "I need you to listen to me carefully," Graves said. His voice was steady but hollow, like a man reciting something he'd been told rather than something he believed. "The DA's office has reviewed the charges. There are procedural concerns about how the wiretaps were authorized."
Henderson felt his blood cool. "Those wiretaps were fully authorized. I filed every document." "I know you did. Then what procedural—" "Frank," Graves looked at him directly, "there are things about this case, about Reeves, that neither of us was cleared to know. I've just been made aware of certain jurisdictional concerns that change the picture." "What does that mean?" Graves was quiet for a moment. "It means," he said slowly, "that the decision to hold Reeves may not be ours to make." The room was completely silent. Henderson heard the clock on the wall tick 3 times before he could form words. "He's a criminal, Elliot. He's had people killed. "I know what we have." Graves's voice cracked slightly on the last word. He cleared his throat. "Go home, Frank. Get some rest. Let this process the way it needs to process." Henderson stared at him.
Graves had been a cop for 28 years. Henderson had never once seen him look afraid. He looked afraid now. Henderson walked out without another word. 2:15 p.m. He went to the evidence room. The 2 officers he didn't recognize were still there. They asked for his ID and case access code. Standard, except that it had never been required before in this building, where everyone knew everyone. He gave the codes. There was a pause while one officer typed something. Then, "I'm sorry, Detective Henderson, your access to case file 7 Reeves has been restricted pending federal review." Henderson stared at the man. "I'm the lead detective on that case." "Yes, sir, I understand. If you have concerns, you can file a formal request with the—" Henderson turned and walked away. He went to his desk, sat down, opened his laptop. His case file, 11 years of documentation, photographs, financial records, surveillance logs, witness statements, was still visible on his screen. He reached for his mouse to open it, and a notification appeared. "File access revoked by system administrator, 11:03 a.m. He checked the timestamp. 11:03 a.m. 20 minutes before Graves had called him into the office. Someone had moved before Graves had even said a word. Henderson sat back in his chair and looked at the ceiling. The pieces were assembling themselves into a shape he didn't want to see. 3 p.m. He found Precious in the parking garage, standing beside her car, not getting in, just standing. He came up beside her. For a moment, neither of them spoke.
"My access is gone," she said. "Mine too. Rebecca Vane called me 20 minutes ago." Precious kept her voice low, even here, even alone. "She wasn't pulled for a personal matter, Frank. She was told to take an administrative leave, effective immediately. No reason given." "Who told her?" "Came from above Graves." Another silence. "How many people are still on the case?" Henderson asked. "As of an hour ago?" Precious exhaled. "Just you, officially." "And unofficially, you." Henderson nodded slowly. Far above them, 42 floors up in a building across the city, a man in a pressed suit had been sipping espresso when they arrived. A man who didn't run, didn't hide, didn't panic. A man who smiled when the cuffs went on. "He planned this," Henderson said quietly. Not a question. "The arrest," Precious said. "The timing, the press outside." She shook her head. "He needed to be seen being arrested." "Why?" Precious looked at him. "Because after this, anyone who comes for him knows what happens. Anyone who builds a case for 11 years, anyone who gets close, they end up standing in a parking garage watching it all disappear." She paused. "It's not a warning, it's a demonstration." 4:47 p.m. Henderson was still at his desk when it happened. He heard it before he saw it. A shift in the background noise of the precinct. Conversations dropping off. Footsteps changing direction. He stood up. Through the glass partition of the bullpen, he could see the hallway outside holding. Tony Reeves was walking out. Not being escorted back to a cell. Not being transferred. Walking out. Two men in suits, the same two from Graves' meeting, were at his flanks, not holding him, walking beside him. The distinction was not subtle. Reeves had his jacket back, his watch, his phone. He was smoothing his cuffs as he walked, the way you do when you've been sitting for a long time and want to look presentable. He passed the bullpen. Henderson stepped out into the hallway. Their eyes met. Reeves stopped. The two men with him stopped. The hallway was quiet. Several officers had frozen where they stood, coffee in hand, documents half filed, the muscle memory of their routines interrupted by something they couldn't categorize. Reeves looked at Henderson for a long moment. Then he reached into his jacket pocket. Henderson's hand moved toward his hip. Instinct. Reeves pulled out a business card. He held it out. Henderson didn't move. After a moment, Reeves set it on the window ledge beside him. "For your daughter," he said quietly. "She's been trying to reach you." He put his hands back in his pockets and walked out the front door. The two men followed. The automatic door slid shut behind them. Nobody moved for a full 5 seconds. Then, one by one, people returned to what they'd been doing. Pretending. Or maybe actually moving on. Henderson couldn't tell which was worse. He walked to the window ledge. Picked up the card. It was blank except for a phone number. He turned it over. On the back, handwritten in neat, unhurried script. "You built a good case, detective. You should be proud." Henderson sat in his car in the parking garage for 40 minutes. He didn't call anyone. Didn't radio in. Didn't file a report. He held the card in one hand. Outside, the city moved. Traffic. People. Lights clicking on as the afternoon turned to evening. He thought about the man who'd been sitting at that table, dressed and waiting, at 4 a.m. He thought about all the things that had to happen for this day to go exactly the way it went. The witness. The access codes. The firm in Washington. The two men who walked out with Reeves like old colleagues collecting a friend from a long flight. 11 years of building a case. Dismantled in 8 hours. Not with chaos. Not with violence. Not with a single threat made out loud. Just removed. Quietly. Like a chess piece lifted off a board by an invisible hand. He looked down at the card again. "You should be proud." He thought about something Reeves had said in the interrogation room. "Who do you think built this room?" Henderson turned the card over in his fingers. And for the first time in 11 years, he didn't have a next move. He sat there as the parking garage darkened around him. One hand on the steering wheel. The card on the dashboard. The city humming outside like nothing had happened. Because to the city, nothing had. That was the part that would keep him awake for years. Not the power Reeves had, but how quietly he used it. How he didn't need to threaten anyone. Didn't need to run. Didn't need to say a single word more than necessary. Because the cage Henderson had spent 11 years building had a door. And Tony Reeves had the key. He always had. The city is in good hands.
If you made it this far, drop a comment. Just one word, whatever this story made you feel. Because power doesn't always look like violence. Sometimes it looks like a man in a pressed suit, sitting calmly at a table at 4 a.m., waiting. Please like and subscribe.